Welcome back to Ready for Merge, the podcast about the evolution of Bitcoin and Ethereum. I'm your host, Christine D. Kim, and on today's show, I'll be discussing Bitcoin developer community building, culture, and events with two special guests. First is niftynei from Bitcoin++. Hi, Nifty.
Hey, Christine, how's it going?
Good. Thanks for being on the show. We also have Charlie Spears from Blockspace Media. Hi, Charlie.
Howdy, Christine. Glad to be here.
I am very excited to get started with this conversation, but before we do that, two announcements. The first is special thanks to Blockspace Media for sponsoring today's DevTalk episode. Blockspace is going to be hosting a Bitcoin developer conference in New York City on April the 16th. To learn more and get tickets, head over to opnext.dev, opnext.dev. And the second announcement is if you're interested in sponsoring an upcoming Ready for Merge episode and speaking directly to an audience of protocol developers and enthusiasts, please do reach out to me via the contact form on protocolwatch.com. That's protocolwatch.com. Yeah. Onwards with our show for today. Charlie and Nifty, for our listeners who aren't very familiar with you guys and your work, can you give just a brief introduction of what you do in Bitcoin? Maybe Charlie, you can kick us off.
Sure. I'm co-founder of Blockspace Media. We're an independent Bitcoin industry media company. We keep it tight, keep it small. We do all of your content verticals, live shows, podcasts, newsletters, events. As for me, I've been in Bitcoin a really long time. It took me about half a decade before I could figure out what I do professionally, and that ended up being Bitcoin mining around 2017 here in Oklahoma. I was that build Bitcoin mines on natural gas wells guy. But long story short, that's a very exhausting, debilitating business. And I would rather sit at a computer all day and talk about Bitcoin rather than actually doing things. So switch to media. I like to say if you're in the business long enough, you eventually become a podcaster. So that's what I am. And but I have a much bigger enthusiasm for the discourse around Bitcoin. And that's what brings us into this modern era of block space, Bitcoin tech, and our conference Up Next.
Yeah. I want to get into some of that discourse on today's episode and the interesting elements or parts of that. Nifty, can you also give a short intro on what you do in the space?
Sure. So I've been a software developer for a really long time. I got into Bitcoin really through my day job. I got hired at Cash App to work on their Bitcoin custodial product back in 2018. I had a lot of fun learning about Bitcoin, and within like 6 months, basically got myself hired to work as a protocol engineer at the Lightning project that Blockstream was working on. I've been at Blockstream for almost 8 years now, and I started running a conference for technical people that are interested in Bitcoin back in 2022. Started here in Austin, Texas. Um, the idea of Bitcoin plus plus is really there's all this really cool and interesting stuff that people are working on in Bitcoin, but that a lot of people don't know about. In 2022, when we started Bitcoin plus plus, if you kind of zoomed out and looked at like kind of the larger ecosystem that what was happening at the time, Craig Wright was suing a lot of Bitcoin core developers. So a lot of people were falling off the map. They were going dark. They were publicly resigning from working on the project. The morale, I would say, of developers in this space just across the board felt really low. People that worked in other parts of the crypto ecosystem love to hate on Bitcoin, particularly Bitcoin development. So a lot of the narrative that you would hear at the time is, oh, there's nothing interesting happening in Bitcoin. All the cool, interesting stuff is happening over in the Ethereum ecosystem, et cetera. And so Bitcoin plus plus was just like, okay, I know that this is not the case. I work at Blockstream. There's cool stuff happening here. How can I help bring together all the people that are doing cool and interesting things in Bitcoin and give them an opportunity to, I don't know, showcase what they're working on like a platform and for people who are working on Bitcoin stuff to find other people working on Bitcoin stuff. Um, that's a long intro, but yeah, so I've been working on Bitcoin Plus Plus now since 2022. We did 6 conferences last year in 6 countries. We're working on doing 8 conferences this year in 8 countries. We just did our first one of the year in Brazil, and we'll be doing our next one in the United States at the Hoover Dam April 23rd and 24th, so right ahead of the Vegas event. So still really excited about that one.
That's also great timing because I know the Bitcoin conference in Vegas. It's like the big tent one for the Bitcoin community. And Nifty, thank you for the color on what the culture was like, the sentiment around Bitcoin development was like when you were first kicking off Bitcoin Plus Plus. And maybe we can start there about how the Bitcoin developer community has kind of changed and evolved. Charlie, would you agree that, or I guess, how do you think that the Bitcoin developer community has changed from a couple of years ago versus now?
Nifty is absolutely right characterizing it like that. While I was not, I would say, inside the world of Bitcoin technical discourse until maybe 22 and 23, it was a as far as I'm aware, all-time low sentiment and low vibes. Um, and this is kind of, I would say, there's many things, but it's also the result of the block size war and the denouement from that, and Craig Wright, and just a lot of stuff. It's very difficult to want to try to be out there and be a Bitcoin developer, and it was, yeah, just very difficult. Insofar as I myself was not very dialed into the technical discourse. Interesting enough, the first real technical conference I went to was Nifty's back in the day, and that's actually probably what red pilled me about the whole technical discourse thing, because I saw what she was trying to demonstrate, which is that there is a lot happening, and there's a ton of these devs, and you've seen this because the conference has grown and gone global. So yeah, I would agree. She characterizes it well there.
Shout out to you, Nifty. You've changed the game for Bitcoin developer sentiment and community building. Do you feel, Nifty, that the work is done now? Bitcoin developers and the rest of the Bitcoin broader ecosystem know what's going on, and sentiment is at all-time highs. Do you feel like your work is done?
No. I feel like the thing about so I'm a developer, and I run into this also. I think the thing about the type of people who become really high performing developers in any ecosystem, Bitcoin's not special that way, is that we tend to be hypercritical, and we tend to nitpick each other because we want the best of the protocol. We want the best out of the work products that we're building. We're very opinionated as people, which means that we don't always seem eye to eye. And so I think in the technical world, if you're not getting together regularly or someone regularly to hang out with each other and remind each other that you're all on the same team, you're all working for the same goals, that all of the disagreements that you might have online about maybe should it be it's silly stuff like bits or sats is a big conversation that maybe doesn't fall so much into the technical realm. It's more on a product side of Bitcoin. But I think that's maybe a good example. Or how should we change things? The post-quantum thing, I feel like it's sort of an interesting new thing that there's a lot of decisions that need to be made collectively about, um, what the path forward is for making Bitcoin ready for post-quantum stuff, for example. So I would say all this to say, I don't think that community building and getting people together will ever go out of fashion in Bitcoin. I think that we're constantly going to need reminders of what other people are working on, why it's cool and exciting, and why are we I think that it's a good reminder that you like all the people that you're working with, and that it is a big community of friends that all see maybe not exactly eye to eye, but close enough, all in the same ballpark. And events like Bitcoin Plus Plus are such a great opportunity, I think, for people to come together and kind of get that reminder.
If I can kind of jump in there, you asked what the difference is between Bitcoin development a few years ago and today. Is people would be very surprised that how small it is, or how small it was, or smaller it was back then. Because I, being a Bitcoin, just thought, oh, if you need a Bitcoin dev, you can just pull one off the shelf. There's it's very kind of easy to find it because Bitcoin's such a big ecosystem. And while it is big in market cap, these specialists are pretty limited. And while it's growing now, it was I remember being at, I think, Bitcoin Plus Plus 2023, and looking around and talking to folks and realizing in that 150 person conference or something that the lead engineers of every single application and company that I knew and used were all in the same room. And it kind of freaked me out because oh, this is the entire mind share for for Bitcoin's technicians. And it's grown bigger since then, but I was also kind of surprised at how apprehensive people were about talking about controversial things. And pretty much everything in Bitcoin is controversial, but it was very difficult in particular to have any kind of optimism towards a soft fork or anything besides narrow engineering problems. And but there was a lot of there was a lot of attitude of, well, we'd like that, but there's a lot of like shaking off of like friction and relationships which have soured over the years, which I think are significantly improved by just getting back together in the same room with people and remind each other that, oh, we have these ideological disagreements, but like they may not be as personal as we think.
Can we unpack a little bit more some of the challenges that come with trying to bring developers together in a room that are highly, highly opinionated and where everything does seem to be an extremely controversial topic, even now? Like when we think about the recent Bitcoin Core V30 upgrade, we're thinking about quantum. This is bringing out maybe for you guys very normal, but also very like highly toxic and highly like there's a lot of animosity. How do you navigate that as event organizers? Do you just kind of stick to one crowd within the small community of Bitcoin developers that just like each other? Or how do you navigate the politics of the Bitcoin developer community when you guys are trying to, build these events?
I'll take a stab at it. First of all, you're always going to make someone mad, so there's no perfect way to do it. But I try to be intellectually honest and be pretty transparent with my biases, my bags, and also I think FaceTime just does a lot for people. So I think that if you can write, because I do a lot of our technical coverage and reporting, if you can write things which are technically correct and say the person who that technical viewpoint represents feels that you accurately represent their viewpoint, even if you have an issue with them or there is some friction there, they will at least see you as like an honest actor, which is a huge foundation for trust. And I think this pertains to quantum, as it relates to like the latest core drama. It's really hard for me to be unbiased about that. I don't think very highly of the other side, but for most other topics like Bitcoin consensus or just I think there's a lot of ground to be gained, a lot of trust to be built there.
Any thoughts there to add, Nifty?
What was the original question? Sorry.
How you navigate the rifts, like the of
Yeah, that
Bitcoin
makes sense.
developer community that kind of hate each other.
So Bitcoin Plus Plus holds a bunch of, I don't think Bitcoin Plus Plus holds a lot of events. And if we did like one way that I strategically make it such that every event is successful is that I usually pick a topic or like a theme for each event. Not to say that there aren't other talks or conversations or projects that get presented at the event that aren't on theme. But I find that that's like often what that helps is it one gives every person that you're inviting to the event like a reason to be there, like a specific like they're like, oh, like usually there's like a project that they're working on that pertains to the theme and like, oh my God, you would be so great to come to this event to talk about the work that you're doing in XYZ particular like avenue, if that makes like that sort of thing. And I find that when you bring people together who are interested and excited about talking about what they're working on specifically, all of a sudden everyone in the room kind of has a core value of something that they care about that's in common. And so maybe there's things at the edges of like their particular approach or what they're working on that they disagree on. But overall, I think the idea is to reorient everyone around like, okay, we all have the same values, or maybe not entirely, but maybe we can figure that out at the conference. And that's like an opportunity to sort of have conversations around where we differ and what our values, like how our values are different. Um, yeah, I don't know. I feel like I get in trouble a lot. Not trouble, but I got in trouble for the conference I did in Austin last year. Not in trouble, but like it.
Was
I
that the
managed
mempool one?
the
Yeah.
mempool one.
Yeah.
I
Well
managed to.
timed.
I managed to get
What
together
happened?
every single person that then, like a week before the conference, there was a pull request on Bitcoin Core, which changed the total amount of bytes. So there's a particular way of putting messages into Bitcoin called op return. Typically, the amount of data that you were allowed to put was it limited to 80 bytes. Someone submitted a pull request and it was merged such that that was changed from 80 bytes to basically unlimited. Like to fill, you could fill the whole block with data there. Um, Almost every single person that was involved in that conversation was coming to Austin the next week on both sides. And this was like there was like that was just so happened to be that that was the timing of the pull request, and that everyone already told me yes to come to this event like 3 months prior, right? So like it just so happened that all these people were going to be together. I got really worried that everyone was going to start canceling on me because they're like, I don't want to talk to this person I've been yelling at on the internet. But luckily, I think everyone like already committed. They already paid for their trip. Like they weren't that mad about it. They were annoyed maybe. So it ended up being that Bitcoin Plus Plus was the event where we had pretty much everyone who was involved in this online disagreement, maybe around values about what belongs in a Bitcoin transaction in person in Austin. It definitely made for a more interesting event, let's say. Um, I think, yeah, we had some formal debates that happened. We had some informal debates that happened. And some of those ended up on screen or get recorded. Some of them didn't. So this year, I'm trying to be like, okay, there are controversial things that we can talk about as Bitcoiners. So our theme for the Bitcoin Plus Plus that we're doing in Vegas in 3 weeks is Villains Edition. I'm working on getting the most controversial ideas that you could have in Bitcoin up on stage. I don't know how well I succeeded. I've got the schedule. I'm going to put it up hopefully today. I'm running behind on things. But the idea is that this is like, okay, there are controversial things happening in Bitcoin. I get really excited about far future fetched ideas, etc. Even if maybe they aren't things that we would ever do or add or change, I think it is kind of fun to talk about stuff. So we're gonna go to the Hoover Dam, bring your best villain's costume, and hang out for 2 days. If you're coming to Vegas and you want to stay on the strip, that's cool. We'll have buses that you can hop on in the morning and we'll take you back after. Um, but yeah, so I don't know. I think this concept of controversy, like, I think it really turns some people off. I know that there's developers who've been working in the space a long time who've been burned out because of the level of disagreement. And I don't even think it's the level of disagreement that burned people out. I think it's like the level of conversation and like the people that are putting up resistance to an idea or decision that's been made tend to be like uninformed or motivated from a sense of tribalism rather than pragmatic technicalism. And so what you end up like having to deal with is a horde of people who don't like maybe you, or they are suspicious of what you're doing, or are like uncertain about why you're proposing this. They want to talk about what your agenda is. Like, I think that there's just like, as a technical person, you're like, okay, well, if you look at what's actually happening and you read like the details of the situation and you had a good understanding of the context that this decision is being made in, there's not anything controversial here. And I think that's kind of what happens. So, like a lot of people that come to Bitcoin Plus Plus conferences tend to be pretty solidly aligned on, I would say, a lot of technical things that maybe in the wider atmosphere are more controversial. And that's because the technical community, there's a general context of understanding of what the trade-offs are and what the technical reality is of what's attempting to be accomplished. And generally, everyone's in pretty good agreement on those basics. But when you get outside of the bubble of the technical context, you do get a lot more just people that like don't have the context for understanding why the decision was made, or I don't know, it seems like there ends up being a lot of tribalism that I think a lot of people use tribalism to make decisions on how things should happen and what to do. And generally, technical people aren't like that. They like don't understand that level of reasoning. And so what you end up like outside of like this doesn't happen to Bitcoin Plus Plus, but like outside of that ecosystem, kind of more online or more bigger general conferences, you end up with a lot more friction between the technical community and the general Bitcoiner community because there's just kind of a lack of understanding.
I'll jump in there, and a lot of this comes into, I think, like your conference audience and profile, and then whether you intend for the conference to cross the chasm into other sectors of the Bitcoin world, because Nifty's nailed the developer community and brought it global. And but a lot of the friction really occurs whenever the non-technical people see the technical people, and they don't have the context and discernment to interpret like false claims or statements, or maybe loaded claims, and it just makes it very like really difficult. What's funny is that story Nifty told about the pull request. It really is kind of a two-part story, because the pull request was a direct result of the conference we had the month prior, where we kind of put the various people in the room with the intention of like hoping that this would spur conversation on the mailing list, which it did, but kind of like got a monkey's paw situation where we did drive forward conversation, but it in retrospect I cringed, seeing that it was that particular conversation. But that, you don't get to choose. And so I think like a lot of you have to communicate like who your audience is. And this is where I see a lot of the gap happening is there's a lot of investors in Bitcoin. And the past few years, all the Bitcoin ownership and custodianship is shifted to the institutions and the big funds. And the gap I see, I don't know how I'm gonna solve like the retail and pleb versus like dev issue. I don't know how to solve that problem, but I do think there's a huge opportunity to connect and build bridges between now the larger institutions and the devs. A lot of people will like be critical of this, and I understand those criticisms, but as it is, the big holders of Bitcoin, the people who are allocating giant amounts of money, they need folks inside their institutions to know what the devs are doing. And so they need to send people to these conferences to get FaceTime and see these like capstone conversations. Because I think a lot of decisions are just made upon previous biases and relationships. So if you can help play a role in forming and like strengthening those relationships and creating good like contexts through which institutions can make decisions, then you can help guide the next several years of Bitcoin developer discussion. I really just want the devs to not have to deal with uninformed public, and I think if you can like give them more direct communication channels, then everyone's happier. We prolong the pain of Bitcoin consensus discussion.
How open is the Bitcoin developer community, in your view, to more institutions getting involved in, knowing what's going on with development, participating in the development and governance process even? I kind of get the impression that many, at least like core active developers, want nothing to do with the institutional audience for Bitcoin, but I'd love to know what your perspective and experience has been in trying to bridge that gap.
I think that's a fair characterization, and it's for a good reason. Like, Bitcoin is inherently anarchic, and the system wants to insulate itself from large economic actors which influence it. But I think that pertains mainly to developers individually. What I think we want to do is be somewhat trusted to provide a neutral venue where people can come and talk and cross-pollinate, but not have to like sign on to like officially associating themselves with an institution. Like, you don't see any Bitcoin devs who want to say like, I'm sponsored by BlackRock. But they need to be talking to someone at BlackRock, so that like this quantum thing, BlackRock has an opinion. We have like the head of BlackRock Digital Assets, because as much as the devs like can argue over quantum is quantum's a thing, if it's feasible, the timeline, the solutions, like the people who have to buy into it are the investors, the other tail end of the stakeholder group. And so like, how does that happen? Is that going to happen in a high friction way, or is it going to happen in what I consider to be the more happy pathway, which is more direct, candid, direct engagement? I know. What do you think, Lisa?
I think there's two things. I think one is that, I mentioned earlier this importance of values. I think that the value set between institution holders and the class of people who typically end up doing open source work on open source protocols tend to be quite different. I don't think that those are always necessarily compatible, unfortunately. So I think that there is a inherent conflict generally built into maybe a subset of the conversations there. I also think that like when you're talking about institutions, I don't think that their concerns are any or should be considered any differently from anyone who holds keys that control or that give permission to spend Bitcoin. I think that anyone who holds Bitcoin at whatever size has similar concerns in terms of their ability to spend it freely, their ability to have confidence that their keys and the knowledge of their keys is the only thing that gives them permission to like move the Bitcoin. In other words, that there isn't a computer that's going to come along with the magic powers that can suddenly move their Bitcoin without their permission. And I think this like focus on, I mean, you can choose to center the concerns of institutions. I'm not saying that they're invalid, but they do tend to have like highly, their business is, I think, to some extent tied to their ability to hold on to these mass quantity of funds. Not, but I don't think that that's necessarily any more or less important than the ability of an individual to retain their own sovereignty, for example. um, I don't know. Bitcoin plus plus like is meant for generally like technical audiences. We're gonna do our first conference that is not generally for technical. We're doing an economics edition in Austria in May, so that's already next month
That's
officially.
cool.
Yeah, so we're gonna have a
Branching out.
yeah, it's in Austria and it's econ, so what better than to try and bring in some Austrian economists to talk about Austrian econ. Some of the criticisms that I believe core developers got in the last year was about not being in touch with the economics of. They're like, there's all these developers that are contributing to Bitcoin that don't really understand economics. Or at least this was, I think, one of the criticisms that you heard levied from Bitcoin holders and like, believers in the strong money aspects of Bitcoin. So this is my opportunity. I'm trying to create an opportunity for the Bitcoiners who are, or even Austrian economists, to come and explain like the economic side of it. So we're gonna have a stage that's the econ stage, as well as one of my favorite things about Bitcoin, why I am such a big like lover of Bitcoin as a protocol, is the free markets that it really opens up, like the protocols for free markets. So I'm putting together a stage that'll also be like the technical side of protocols for free markets. So it'll be economics in terms of here's some really cool protocols that we've built. Like, so hash rate exchange markets would be great. Charlie, I'd love to hear if you have any ideas of mining companies that are working on cool and interesting economic protocols for hash rate derivatives or even selling block space. Um, one of my like biggest loves about Bitcoin is how free the Blockspace market actually is in terms of it being an equal access, equal opportunity market that's global, permissionless. Anyone can participate in it by making a Bitcoin transaction. Anyone can participate in it by setting up a miner and contributing hash rate to the network. We literally don't have any, like, it's not regulated I mean, you could probably spend like 6 hours talking about mempool policies in terms of like whether or not that's regulation. Um, but I think that like there's a lot of other examples of cool economic protocols that are happening in Bitcoin. There's cool stuff with DLCs. There's some really interesting stuff I think on liquidity markets and Lightning. So really like kind of trying to put together a slightly different. It's still technical, I think. Like maybe Austrian economics is a technical field in a more of a liberal arts sense. But yeah, generally we really focus on like I come from the developer ecosystem. I got into a lot of the stuff, like all the cool projects that I'm as part of through going through developer conferences and presenting at them myself. And so like Bitcoin plus plus is really intended to be like, I think of as like Google I/O is kind of the pinnacle of like a really cool, fun like developer conference. That one's run by Google every year. They like announce um, their new phones, like every new Android operating system gets launched at Google I/O every year. It was like the first big developer conference that I went to as a young engineer in my 20s. So I'm really like hoping that like Bitcoin Plus Plus can be that like forum for technical innovation and projects and ideas for Bitcoin development. Uh, but okay, I'm like way off topic, but yeah, that's what I've been working on for Bitcoin Plus Plus, and why we're like particularly focused on developers and technicals of development over and above maybe stakeholders in Bitcoin.
Yeah, I love that both of you guys you have that focus on the Bitcoin developer community, but you're both bridging the Bitcoin developer community to perhaps like stakeholders and people that they're not connected to. So like the Austrian economics community, Charlie with OpNext with the institutions, and I think really really important work. I guess one other topic or question that I wanted to ask you guys was from recent controversy with Brink's engineering impact report. In the report, one of the bullets was that there is, one of the developers that they employ, they helped merge like over half of. Oh, did we lose Charlie?
I think so.
Oh, no. Okay, well, if he comes back in, I'll definitely let him in. But I guess this one's for you, Nifty.
Okay.
I guess now all the questions are going to be for you. But in the report, it was talking about how one of the Bitcoin Core maintainers that Brink employs, he merged like over half of the code changes, the pull requests from 2025 alone, and people were saying, the group of Bitcoin Core developers is still so small, like the active maintainers and the institutions that fund Bitcoin development. So I guess, and I've talked to many people around this, and some people actually don't think that's a problem, as in there's already been so much growth. Like now there's 5 maintainers instead of 1, or there's 6 organizations funding Bitcoin Core rather than just 2. So there's, to them, like it's, or to certain people that I've talked to, it's not a huge issue. There's been tons of improvement. Nifty, when you're organizing these events, is part of your goal to grow the number of people that are actively maintaining Bitcoin as a protocol? Is one of your goals like decentralizing and pushing out further the developer community?
So my focus is not on Bitcoin Core necessarily as a project. I think that the goal of Bitcoin Plus Plus is so I think another criticism or like another result maybe of that I've heard people have worked on Bitcoin Core say is that you have to know people in order to get your pull request merged. So maybe there's a small group, maybe it's one person, maybe it's like a small group. I'm gonna be honest, I haven't paid a lot of attention in terms of what exactly is going on in Bitcoin Core. I mean, I do try and keep track of what the big topics are, what people are working on, so that I have a good context of what might make interesting projects to pull into the event series to, talk about their work and get more people working on it. But I think of Bitcoin Plus Plus more as an ecosystem play. Bitcoin Plus Plus or Bitcoin Core is one piece of the puzzle, but there's a lot of protocols that are building on top of it, and there's a lot of decisions about what gets put into Bitcoin Core and into the Bitcoin protocol that, I worked in the Lightning ecosystem for a very long time and saw just like the relationship that like that other Lightning ecosystem, which maybe isn't involved in the day-to-day work of Bitcoin Core, has needs and use cases for what ends up in the Bitcoin Core protocol that those sorts of like that kind of work, the cross kind of project work requires places where people are coming together and talking about what they're working on. So again, and I think that information creates opportunities and is inspiring to people in terms of finding the right project to work on. There's lots of things in Bitcoin, not just Bitcoin Core, but Bitcoin observation. There's this cool project that B10C came to Brazil last 2 months ago now to talk about his Bitcoin network of observation. I think it's BNOC. Bitcoin network observation community. So he's starting a new community project to help monitor and observe the network of Bitcoin core nodes that are across the network. He's been pioneering a lot of observational work. I think he occasionally works on Bitcoin Core, but most of his focus is on profiling and monitoring the network. So that's not maybe directly related to Bitcoin Core as a project, but I think that, you know, the idea is to attract and bring in people who are interested in learning about what's going on, give them access to people that are doing cool and interesting work, and give them the opportunity to educate themselves, learn from people that are doing it about what needs more work, how they can get involved, how they can be useful to people that are already doing work, if that makes sense. Because I think, like, you know, the way that I got into Lightning was by finding a bug in Bitcoin and emailing someone and talking to them and trying to figure out how to fix it. Um, there's so much surface area for contributions and for people to like understand what's happening and you know, I think contribute to the conversation or like propose solutions to different things, etc. Maybe submit bug patches, that kind of thing. Like there's a lot of work that's still to be done. There's definitely not enough people, I think, to handle all of this stuff. But your ability to contribute is a lot higher. You're a lot more effective, and your contributions, I think, will be a lot more accepted and appreciated if people have had the opportunity to tell you about what they're working on and why they need help and like what the challenges are. I think another thing, just in general, you talked about, okay, there was one Bitcoin Core maintainer, now there's five. That's huge growth. I think the thing that for me, like with the conference series, at least, the goal or the ideal is that one of the goals is that knowledge sharing. Because if there's, sure, maybe there's five people right now that have the official hat of being a Bitcoin Core maintainer. And for those of you who are listening who aren't aware of what the difference between like a Bitcoin Core contributor or someone who works on Bitcoin or another part in a Bitcoin Core maintainer, is maintainers are the only people that have the permissions to merge new changes into Bitcoin Core. Um, but I think I think it's like, okay, maybe there's five people that have the permissions to actually submit changes, but the more important thing is that there's maybe 100 people that really understand all the context of the decisions that are being made and why it's happening. And so maybe something happened to, you know, one of the core contributors or one of the maintainers, finding a replacement or finding someone who could step up and take up the responsibility for it would not be like a years long search. And that we wouldn't be, I mean, of course, every person and contributor who works in Bitcoin maybe has a different knowledge set than the others. So like not, there's no one person that understands all of the pieces and bits of what make Bitcoin, but having some redundancy across the ecosystem requires more people and it requires understanding. And you get that, I think, by showing up and talking to people at conferences. So um, I hope that answers your question.
It does, 100%. And follow-up question to that, when you are hosting your Bitcoin Plus Plus events, especially the ones that are perhaps more global outside of the US, outside of North America, what share of your attendees are attendees that are already like, you know, veterans in the Bitcoin developer space and flying in because they have all the social financial capital to do so, versus the attendees that are local or like new, just wanting to see like how they could contribute, that are learning perhaps about, maybe they're Web 2, like more traditional developers, like coming to learn about Bitcoin. Can you give a little bit of a vignette of what you've seen with some of this turnout?
Yeah, I would say that probably 20% of people are new or looking for a place. They're kind of still on that like more upward, or maybe closer to 30% are like on their more upward trajectory of their career. Um, I'm so bad. I purposely don't keep statistics on people who come to my conference. Maybe I should, just because I don't know, maybe I'm weird about it. But I think that another cool thing about doing the events all around the globe is that it really gives one of the important things about being global for Bitcoin Plus Plus, at least from my opinion, is that Bitcoin is a global decentralized project. And it is a global protocol that is held and it is used by people all over the globe. Um, there's some amazing work that's happening in projects across the globe. There's like 2140 in the Netherlands. There is the Vinci project in Brazil. Libreria de Satoshi, Chinko Labs runs some great projects in the US with fellowships to bring in new people to Bitcoin. There is Bitshala in India. Like there's a Plan B has like a whole network that's trying to bring people in technically. So there's all these little projects all over the place. Bitcoin Plus Plus is trying as much as possible to be a forum where you can bring people from North America, Europe, Asia together to meet all these other people. So you have a face that you can put to the name, and you have an idea about like, okay, what's happening in Bitcoin in all these different, in all these different topics or places. So I don't know. I kind of forgot the question. That's okay. But
That's
yeah,
okay.
yeah. But I think like if you look across, like one thing that running all these events is kind of tiring. Sometimes I feel like I would rather like maybe dealing with people is like exhausting. I am like not exhaust. It's not. They're great. Like I sometimes make the joke that Bitcoin Plus Plus started because I wanted to hang out with my friends, and needed a way to find sponsors to pay for it. It's because like bringing people together is like I think a really important thing. The there was a bigger point I was trying to make here though about I think a lot of when you look across the ecosystem as a whole, though, there aren't very many open forums where if you're interested in Bitcoin from a technical perspective, you can buy a ticket, you can show up, and you can hang out with people who are working on cool stuff. I think like the surface area for that is actually quite limited, and the majority of conferences. It's not true. There's like some one-off. There's an amazing project called Freedom Tech Day that's going to happen in Prague right before the Prague event. Btrust does a developer day every year. Oh, I forgot Btrust. Btrust is another amazing organization that's like training devs and adding people to the global Bitcoin developer ecosystem. They have a developer day that they do every year. There's TabConf down in Atlanta. Charlie Spears and I think is it Will Foxley started their Op Next conference up in. They're usually on the East Coast. So they were in the DC area last year. They'll be in New York City this year. But a lot of like the opportunities for open kind of a conference where anyone who wants to can buy a ticket and show up and talk to Bitcoin developers is like kind of. I know there's a lot of Bitcoin Plus Plus conferences, but if you took that off the board, it would be quite limited. Um, if that makes sense. So I don't know, it just feels really important to be able to continue making these open forums for technical people to show up and talk about Bitcoin wherever they are in the globe. You don't have to come to like hopefully the idea is that you don't have to come to America to feel like you're in the room for people making decisions about Bitcoin. You can show up to a conference, a Bitcoin Plus Plus conference, and meet the people that are doing cool and important work. Be a part of the conversation without having to like spend tons of money or be well connected or get an invitation to an exclusive protocol or developer meeting. um, I think it's important for Bitcoin that the conversation stays open and accessible, and so Bitcoin plus plus is whether or not we're actually achieving that I think is like an open question, but as much as possible trying to make it available for people to show up and find out what people are working on.
One final question for you, Nifty, on this topic of the Bitcoin developer community. From your perspective, organizing these events, meeting all these developers, what would you say is either like types of developers or types of like development activity that you think is most lacking right now and needs more support on?
That's a really good question. What needs more hands, basically?
Yes.
Like if you've got spare hands where are they needed? Oh man. I should have a better answer for this. I feel like I don't really. Maybe this is a personal one, but I feel like the user interface between the protocol and what people have in their hands in terms of wallets, like,
Mm.
which is sort of ironic. So I served on the OpenStats board, which is like a very large nonprofit. It's probably one of the most well-funded open source grant giving nonprofits in the open source world, maybe period. But Bitcoin for certainly. They've got a huge treasury. If you're working on a cool open source project, they're a great way to apply to get funding. I highly recommend it. I've had a lot of friends that got funded through it. Very grateful for all the work that they do. Where was I going with this? One of the things though was that like we would get so many applications for people to build wallets, and it was always something that I was like, this is such building a good wallet, open source wallet, is like such a difficult problem.
Why?
The surface area of things that you have to support, the level of responsibility of what might go wrong is very high. Um, you were like the funding, like the funding question about like the need for customer support is incredibly high. If people have problems with their wallets, they're gonna want someone to talk to for the most part. Um, and the funding for it is like really like there's new protocols coming out all the time, like new wallet types, like the requirement for staying kind of like on top of new developments in the protocol, I would say, is actually quite challenging. Like Bitcoin adds a new wallet type. How long has it taken? Like how long did it take for Coinbase to start accepting Taproot wallets, for example? It's just an example. Like, how long did it take for a wallet to be able to accept Lightning? There's new protocols coming out now, two different types of Arcade. There's a Fedimint, there's Cashew wallets. Like, there's all kinds of ways that you can hold and move Bitcoin around. I don't know. I feel like but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe someone's already solved it, whatever. But I do think that like the user interface between like holding your Bitcoin and doing it in a nice way where you still can be sovereign and independent, um, the how those projects get supported and funded and like all the people that would put in applications for wallets, a lot of them, um, it was like someone who's new and they're like, my first project is going to be a Bitcoin wallet. And that's not and it's like, okay, that's great, but like that's not gonna be something that I feel like you'll get maybe like the overwhelming amount of applications for fund is to make a new wallet that they're writing from scratch because that is a fun new way to like get into Bitcoin and touch it and approach it. But from like okay, how many projects of these are we gonna get? How many of them are we gonna fund and like what's the net outcome in terms of like actual software, et cetera, that ends up happening, I think is always I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this, but yeah, I think that's a hard problem. I don't know that there's like a necessarily like easy solution for it either.
Yeah, it sounds like also from what you're saying, it's a bigger project to tackle than maybe newcomers even think. Like I didn't know that there was, yeah, all those considerations, like long-term
Yeah.
considerations of maintaining that wallet and really making sure that it's safe for users and the customer service required. Funnily enough, because I do cover like the Bitcoin core meetings on Thursdays, there's been quite a bit of activity around the reviving the QML GUI. Is that going to be helpful? Like if developers were to push that, would that change the game for making it perhaps easier to get more innovation on the Bitcoin wallet side, or you don't think so? No.
I don't know. I don't know because the odds that's not going to support Lightning, right? Like, there's no way in hell that the KMU wallet that Bitcoin Core ships is going to support Lightning, for example. Like, that's not going to happen. I don't see that. I could see it being something that protocol developers are pushing because they want a silent payments wallet, for example. Like, like this, but then it becomes like, oh, there's this protocol that needs a wallet. So like, let's make a wallet and we'll put it through Bitcoin Core because that's like a funding that has funding. So that's the way that we can get this project funded. But I would bet that it's probably around, I mean, because there aren't a lot of like silent payment wallets, for example. There's not a lot of wallets that use, or support. I think it's growing, but like there's this new protocol, okay, PayJoin, that's an on-chain protocol. Anyways, like there's all these new protocols that are coming out that you need wallets to support in order for them to like reach users and get adopted. I don't think that's ever, yeah, I don't think that's ever going to be an easier problem. Um, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but yeah, that would be my thing. I think one of the big issues with Bitcoin in general, like a lot of the Bitcoin core devs, like I wish Charlie would come back. Like I don't know where he
Wow,
went,
I don't know
but
why he
like
just left us.
maybe his internet got cut. I don't know. They ran out of gas in Oklahoma. No, I'm kidding. That would never happen. They're like a gas production state. But the
His miners literally took his all of his electricity. I guess maybe he got a block or something.
yeah. I mean, I think what Charlie is doing, this is like totally different. Like what Charlie's doing is really interesting because I think like coming from the miner perspective, It's really, I didn't really put it together until I was in New York a few weeks ago at an event. I was talking to Antoine Ponsat, or he goes by Derosier, who's a chain code employee these days. I know him from when we used to work on Core Lightning together back in the day. Um, but he was saying that he's trying to get like he's got this big proposal called the Great Consensus Cleanup, which is I'm, I'm going to say unfortunately a soft fork, but it cleans up a lot of things that are potential attack vectors and just like problems with um, existing protocol. It's kind of like sort of I would say like almost like tightening the edges, like kind of like tightening down, battening down the hatches a little bit harder on the protocol to make it harder to do attacks or like cause problems. So all in all, it's like almost like housekeeping. Yeah, maybe that's a good word for it. It's like a housekeeping soft work in some ways. But he was saying that like, one of the reasons he was interested in going to OpNext is that they were Charlie and Will Foxley have more connections to the mining industry, and in order to get a soft fork shipped in Bitcoin, you actually need connections and a conversation and a line of communication with mining companies, which is an interesting, I would think, it's kind of an interesting piece of the Bitcoin puzzle. So I think that like I said, Bitcoin Plus Plus is a technical conference and we're aiming to like grow the ecosystem and bring in more knowledgeable people to work on protocols as well as give people working on protocols an opportunity to like share what they're working on and, you know, um, build better connections with other projects in this space. It was a that conversation that I had with Antoine was a good reminder of the importance of cross community collaboration to make Bitcoin work. So like having miners as a part of the conversation and these broader ecosystem conferences are very important pieces of the ecosystem and for keeping Bitcoin moving. I think like everyone talks and complains about how soft forks haven't happened in a long time. But part of that, I think, is that it's just there are so many different pieces of the organization that need to have communication and shared values and really understand the value proposition of, why they're working in Bitcoin and what they're doing. So I don't know, I remain bullish on Bitcoiners getting together to talk about the cool stuff that they're excited about and improvements that we're making to Bitcoin, possible changes that we could make. Um, and I can't wait to see everyone in Vegas and the Hoover Dam potentially in like a couple weeks. So that should be really good.
For sure. Thank you so much for the time, Nifty.
Yeah, likewise, Christine.
And also thank you to Charlie for joining us for the first half of this discussion. Um, and thank you to everybody who is listening to another episode of Ready for Merge, the podcast that helps you stay ahead of the curve on Bitcoin and Ethereum development. In the show notes of today's episode, we are going to link to Bitcoin Plus Plus events, Nifty's handle, and Charlie's as well, just for anyone who wants to follow up on any of the conferences and the events that were discussed on today's episode. I'll also link to the OpenSats 2 page in case people are interested, sending in an application too. So yeah, if you want to learn more, check that out and tune in again next week for a new episode of Ready for Merge. Thanks for listening. Bye, everyone.